They thought she was a nobody trespassing on the diamond deck. The security guard was seconds away from dragging her to the holding cells to be exiled at the next port. The rich guests laughed, waiting for the temp to be erased from their sight. But they didn't know that Ayanna Faye wasn't a guest. She was the ghost architect of the entire Kwon Empire. When Elias Kwon stepped out of the shadows, he didn't just save her, he ended the secret that kept her safe. He knelt before her, and in that moment, Ayanna realized her life of luxury was over. Her life as a target had just begun. Ayanna Faye stood by the railing of the Sovereign. The ocean was dark, but the ship was glowing with gold lights. She held her titanium tablet tightly. It was her only tool for managing Elias Kwon's massive wealth. For months, they had lived like strangers to keep her safe. If the world knew she was the ghost behind his money, she would never be free again. Nearby, a girl named Chloe was talking to her friends. Chloe's family was very rich, and she liked everyone to know it. She looked at Ayanna's simple blue dress and frowned. "I think the ship is letting the workers use the VIP deck now," Chloe said loudly. "It is getting so crowded. I can't even see the moon without seeing tourists." Her friends laughed. Chloe walked over to Ayanna with a fake smile. "Excuse me, dear. Could you take this empty glass? And tell the kitchen we need more fruit." Ayanna didn't look up from her tablet. "I don't work for the ship, Chloe. But I am sure the waiter will be here soon." Chloe's face turned red. She felt embarrassed. "If you aren't staff, where is your gold badge? This deck is only for people who belong here." She waved over a nearby guard. This guard was new and didn't know the ship's secrets. "Officer, this girl is trespassing. She doesn't have a badge and she's being very rude." The guard looked at Ayanna. He didn't see a queen, he saw a girl who looked out of place. "Miss, you need to come with me to the holding cells. You will be removed from the ship at the next port." He reached out and grabbed Ayanna's arm. He pulled her so hard that her tablet fell and hit the deck with a loud crack. Suddenly, a tiny dog in a pearl sweater started barking. The dog was so scared by the noise that it accidentally peed right on the guard's shiny boots. The guard jumped back, looking silly, but then he stopped moving. Elias Kwon walked out of the shadows. He looked like a king from an old story. He didn't say a word, but the guard felt the heat of his anger. Elias knelt in the mess on the floor, picked up Ayanna's broken tablet, and stood up. "Chairman Kwon." Chloe squeaked. "We were just following the rules." Elias ignored her. He took Ayanna's hand and kissed it. "I'm sorry, Ayanna. I tried to keep you a secret to protect you. But I won't let them treat you like a ghost anymore." He looked at the crowd. "This is Ayanna Faye Kwon. She co-owns the ship. Guard, you have 10 minutes to pack your bags." Ayanna saw a man in a gray suit filming them. "Elias," she whispered. "The secret is gone. Now, they know where to find me." The heavy gold doors of the master suite clicked shut, cutting off the whispers of the shocked crowd outside. Ayanna did not head for the velvet sofa or the balcony with the ocean view. Instead, she went straight to her desk and pulled a small, silver tool from her drawer. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Beside her, Elias was pacing like a tiger in a silk suit. His jaw was tight, and he looked ready to fire everyone on the ship. "The secret is out, Ayanna," he said, his voice low and rough. The man in the gray suit was a plant. He wasn't just filming for social media. He was sending your face to every rival family in the underworld. My protection just became a spotlight. Ayanna didn't look up. She was busy scanning the room with a device that checked for hidden signals. "I know, Elias. But we have a bigger problem. You picked up my tablet back there, right?" Elias frowned and handed her the device with the cracked screen. Ayanna ran her finger over the edge of the titanium frame. She didn't look for a scratch. She looked for a microscopic gap in the metal. "There," she whispered. She pointed to a tiny, black dot no bigger than a grain of salt stuck inside the crack. This isn't a Wi-Fi bug. It's a physical tracker that uses the ship's own vibration to send data. They already had access to this deck, but access isn't enough. They needed my digital signature to bypass the Master Suite's biometric locks and the Empire's private servers. Someone didn't just stumble upon us. They engineered that scene with Chloe and the guard specifically to make me drop this tablet. The humiliation on deck was never the goal. This bug was. Elias stopped pacing. The anger in his eyes turned into cold, sharp focus. This was the Korean Mafia boss the world feared, the man who could erase a company's bank account before they finished their morning coffee. The tablet was in your sight the whole time, Elias noted. Except for the 3 seconds it was on the floor after the dog, well, after the accident. He looked down at his shoes, realizing he was still wearing the same pair that had been the target of the tiny dog's fear. He let out a long, tired sigh and kicked off his expensive Italian loafers. I am the most feared man on the Pacific, and I just got outsmarted by a puppy in a pearl sweater. Despite the danger, Ayanna let out a small, soft laugh. The image of the powerful Elias Kwon being defeated by a 3-pound dog was exactly what she needed to calm her nerves. At least the guard has it worse, she teased. He's probably scrubbing his boots with a toothbrush right now. Elias cracked a small smile, but it faded quickly. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark horizon. If they can get a bug onto your personal tech, they have someone inside my inner circle, Ayanna. This isn't just about a jealous socialite anymore. This is a coup. Ayanna stood up and walked over to him, placing her hand on his arm. She felt the tension in his muscles. Then we change the game, she said firmly. They think they caught the ghost architect, but they forgot one thing. I designed the security for this ship. If there is a spy on board, I won't just find them. I'll make them wish they had stayed on land. She turned back to her computer, her fingers flying across the keys. Suddenly, a red light began to flash on her screen. Her face went pale. Elias, look. The bug isn't just sending audio. It's a key. Someone just used the tracker to bypass our bedroom's digital lock. They aren't coming for the data. They are already in the hallway. The red light on Ayanna's screen was not a glitch, it was a digital ghost haunting the ship's nervous system. They didn't break into the room physically, Elias, she whispered, her fingers moving across the keys with a speed that blurred her knuckles. They used a mirror protocol, they didn't hack the door. They convinced the ship's computer that Ayanna herself was opening it. She explained that the rivals, who had boarded the ship as diamond-level investors under fake corporate names, had used the signal repeater bug hidden in her cracked tablet to clone her digital signature. They weren't picking physical locks or dodging guards. The ship's central computer literally thought Ayanna herself was the one opening the high-security doors. Elias stood by the master suite entrance, his hand resting against the cold obsidian wall. He was still dressed in his sharp, tailored charcoal suit, his eyes as cold and focused as a winter sea. He didn't look panicked, he looked deeply disappointed in the security he had paid millions to perfect. I built the Sovereign to be a floating fortress, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated in the small room. But a fortress is only as strong as the keys held by its keepers. He looked at Ayanna, and for a moment, the high-tech sensors and gold-leaf ceilings of the suite seemed to vanish. He was back in a rain-streaked office in Geneva, Switzerland, 2 years ago. That was the night of the Geneva Pact. They had sat across from each other, a disgraced financial genius and a man whose name was whispered in fear across the Pacific. He had offered her a contract marriage, a legal shield that would erase her past and give her his name. In return, she would become the ghost architect of his empire. The pact wasn't just a piece of paper, Ayanna, Elias reminded her, his gaze locking onto hers. It was a promise of total invisibility, a legal marriage on paper, binding in every court on earth, but invisible to the world by design. You kept my name, but the world was never meant to know it. If they have managed to clone your signature, then the pact is being dismantled from the inside. Ayanna nodded, a spark of defiance lighting up her dark eyes. Then we don't just fix the lock, Elias. We rewrite the entire language of the door. Instead of fleeing, she used her tablet to create a data loop. She fed the ship's AI a fake version of her own GPS coordinates. While the rivals were chasing her ghost signal toward the empty laundry decks on the lower levels, she was actually rerouting the ship's internal servers to a private cloud they couldn't touch. Suddenly, a strange, metallic scratching sound echoed from the air vent above the bed. Elias didn't flinch or reach for a vase. He drew a sleek, suppressed sidearm from his shoulder holster with a fluid motion that proved he was a king who knew how to fight his own wars. Out of the vent popped a tiny, robotic vacuum cleaner that had been hijacked with a high-definition spy camera. It was spinning in useless circles on the carpet, its blue sensor light blinking rapidly in confusion. They tried to use the ship's own maintenance droids to spy on us, Ayanna said, watching the robot bump into Elias's polished leather boot over and over again. But when I rerouted the servers, I scrambled its navigation. It doesn't know where the floor is anymore. Seeing the most feared man in the Pacific standing over a confused, 3-pound cleaning robot with a professional weapon was the first time the heavy tension of the night truly broke. Ayanna let out a genuine, quiet laugh that reached her eyes. Elias looked down at the robot, then back at his wife, and a small, dry smile touched his lips. "I'll have my men arrest the vacuum for trespassing," he joked, though his tone remained sharp. The moment of humor was cut short when the tablet gave a long, steady beep. The rivals had realized the laundry deck was empty. They had bypassed the loop and were now headed directly for the bridge. Elias and Ayanna did not take the elevators, those were glass traps that could be frozen with a single command. Instead, they moved through the shadow stairs, a private titanium passage built inside the ship's internal walls, designed for the king to move unseen. As they reached the bridge's secondary deck, Ayanna plugged her tablet into the ship's internal radio frequency. She pulled her headset over her ears, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. "They are talking, Elias," she whispered. The rivals, who had successfully bypassed her initial data loop using the palace codes, were now using a rare, ancient coastal dialect from a remote province. It was a language so old and obscure that modern translation apps couldn't decode it in real time. They were laughing over the comms, clearly believing their secret language made them invisible to any eavesdroppers. They were openly discussing the legal incapacity notice they planned to file the moment they reached international waters, a move that would officially strip Elias of his command and his life's work. "They think this is a game of whispers played in the dark," Elias said, his face a mask of cold, sharp fury as he checked the chamber of his sidearm. He didn't rush the heavy steel doors of the bridge yet. He was a mafia king, and he knew that if he used raw force now, the rivals would simply hit a delete key and erase the evidence of their digital trespassing. He didn't just want them off his ship, he needed a full confession to bury them. Ayanna adjusted the audio filters on her screen, her eyes reflecting the scrolling green code. "I'm not just translating their words anymore, Elias," she said, a small, confident smirk playing on her lips. "I am using the audio fragments of their conversation to deepfake their patriarch's voice in real time." She was weaving their own phonetics into a weapon. Inside the bridge, the three rivals were relaxed, their feet up on the navigation consoles as they sipped stolen cognac. They felt untouchable. Suddenly, the bridge's emergency speakers crackled to life. A voice, booming, ancient, and filled with terrifying authority, spoke to them in that same rare, coastal dialect. It was the exact voice of the rival's own family leader back on the mainland. "You absolute fools," the voice shouted, echoing off the glass windows of the bridge. "Elias Kwon was 3 steps ahead of you. The maritime police are already boarding through the lower cargo bay. If you are found on the bridge, the entire family's reputation is finished. Destroy your phones and get out through the service hatch now." The rivals froze, their faces turning a sickly shade of gray. Because the order came in their most private family language, delivered with the perfect tone of their leader, they didn't doubt the command for a single second. They scrambled for the exit in a blind panic, one of them tripping over a rolling captain's chair and falling face-first into a pile of navigation charts with a loud, pathetic thud. They didn't even look back as they fled toward the service stairs, leaving behind a trail of spilled drink and chaos. Elias stepped out from the shadows of the doorway just as the last one vanished, his mere presence in the hallway making the man scream in terror as he scrambled away like a cornered rat. "The bridge is secure," Elias said, his voice calm and terrifying as he picked up a discarded, chocolate-covered smartphone one of them had dropped in their rush. Ayanna stepped up beside him, her tablet already tethered to the phone's hardware. "Elias, it wasn't just a rival family," she whispered, her eyes widening as she read the decrypted messages. "The codes they used to bypass the filters, they came from your mother's personal secretary." Elias's jaw tightened. "The war isn't coming from the ocean," he whispered. "It's coming from the palace." The bridge was theirs. But the ballroom was watching. And 1,000 powerful enemies were still holding their champagne glasses, waiting to see who would fall. The transition from the cold, metallic silence of the bridge to the suffocating luxury of the grand ballroom happened in a blur of gold-plated elevators and hushed, tactical commands. As the heavy oak doors of the ballroom's upper mezzanine swung open, the scent of expensive lilies and vintage champagne hit them like a physical weight. Below, 1,000 of the world's most powerful people were whispering behind crystal flutes, their eyes darting constantly to the empty royal table at the center of the room. The Blacklist Gala was supposed to be a celebration of the Kwon Empire's dominance, but the air felt more like a funeral. Rumors had already leaked through the ship's encrypted guest network that the Phantom King had lost control of his own command deck. Elias placed Ayanna's hand on his arm, his touch steady and grounding against the silk of her sleeve. "Keep your head high, Ayanna," he murmured, his voice a low, private frequency. "In this room, a confident smile is a more effective weapon than any gun I carry." They began their descent down the grand marble staircase, two figures of dark elegance against the white stone. The room went dead silent. The mystery wife was not in tears, and the Korean Mafia boss was not in handcuffs. They looked like gods returning to a temple they had never truly left. At the bottom of the stairs, Mr. Vane, a shipping mogul who had been the loudest voice spreading the incapacity rumors, stepped forward, his face a mask of fake concern. "Chairman, we were worried. There were reports of unauthorized personnel in the command center tonight. Some said the ship was no longer yours to steer." The surrounding elite leaned in, their eyes like vultures waiting for a carcass to stumble. Elias stopped inches from Vane, his presence so suffocating that the mogul actually stepped back, nearly tripping over his own shadow. "A ship is only adrift when its leader loses his nerve, Vane," Elias said, his voice a smooth, terrifying hum. "I allowed a few guests to test my security tonight. It was a drill. And I now have the full list of everyone who was ready to sell their shares the moment they thought the lights flickered." Ayanna didn't wait for Vane to respond or recover his dignity. She tapped her tablet, and the massive 8K digital screens surrounding the ballroom, usually showing abstract art, suddenly flickered with a harsh, white light. They displayed a high-speed scroll of bank account numbers, shipping manifests, and private GPS logs. "Mr. Vane," Ayanna said, her level 7 English cutting through the tension like a diamond through glass. "While you were waiting for our fall, I was auditing your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It seems you've been using Kwon-protected shipping lanes to move unlisted cargo without paying the family's tax." The room gasped as the numbers turned red on the screen. She wasn't just defending her husband, she was dismantling an empire in front of its peers. "As of this second, you are blacklisted from every port owned by the Kwon family. You are no longer a mogul, Mr. Vane. You are a debt that we have decided to collect." Vane, desperate to escape the judging eyes of the crowd, tried to retreat into the shadows. He didn't see the waiter behind him carrying a massive silver tray of Black Forest chocolate shooters. He collided with the tray, sending 50 cups of thick chocolate cream and cherry syrup flying into the air like a sweet explosion. Vane slipped on the cream, his legs scissoring wildly in his expensive tuxedo, and he landed flat on his back with a wet thud. A giant glob of whipped cream landed perfectly on his bald head, making him look like he was wearing a tiny, delicious chef's hat. A duchess standing nearby let out a muffled snort of laughter that quickly turned into a room-wide titter. Elias didn't laugh, but he looked down at the chocolate-covered man with cold pity. "Clean that up," he told the guards. "And take the chef to the cargo deck. He has a long walk home once we dock." As the guards dragged the humiliated mogul away, Ayanna's tablet buzzed with a private, high-priority video link. The caller ID read, "The Palace." The heavy velvet curtains of the private VIP lounge muffled the laughter from the ballroom, replacing the chaos of the gala with a silence that felt like a burial shroud. Elias did not look at the screen as the video call from the Kwon Palace connected. Instead, he stood by the reinforced glass window, watching the ship cut through a sudden, unnatural fog that had swallowed the horizon. On the massive display, the image of his mother, Madame Kwon, appeared. She sat in a traditional wooden pavilion at the ancestral Kwon estate, her silver hair pinned back with a jade phoenix, a tea set laid out before her with mathematical precision. She did not look like a woman who had just attempted a maritime coup, she looked like a monarch deciding which piece to sacrifice next. "You were late to the ballroom, Elias," she said, her voice a calm, melodic ice. "A king who cannot keep his own schedule will eventually lose his time altogether." She didn't acknowledge Ayanna at first, treating her like a decorative shadow, but Ayanna stepped into the light of the camera's lens, her tablet still clutched in her hand like a shield. "He wasn't late, madam," Ayanna spoke, her words precise and devoid of fear. "He was simply ensuring that the trash your secretary sent to our bridge was properly disposed of. If you wanted to test my husband's security, you should have sent soldiers, not accountants with stolen codes." The air in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Madame Kwon's eyes shifted to Ayanna, sharp and predatory. "The ghost architect," the older woman mused, lifting a porcelain cup. "My son tells me you are the reason his ledgers are clean and his enemies are silent. Do you know what that means to me? It means my son's entire empire, 40 years of blood and sacrifice, now has a single point of failure. You. If I control you, I control every password, every offshore account, every weapon he has ever built. A ghost is only useful as long as it stays in the shadows and serves the family that shelters it. When it tries to sit at the family table independently, it stops being an asset. It becomes a throne that must be reclaimed." This was the digital tea ceremony, a verbal war disguised as etiquette. Madame Kwon was testing whether Ayanna would bow or break. Elias finally turned from the window, his hand resting on the back of Ayanna's chair in a silent declaration of war against his own blood. "Mother, the game is over. I have the confession of your secretary and the logs of the Heritage Foundation's override. If you move against her again, I will leak the Foundation's ties to the offshore shipyards." Madame Kwon let out a soft, chilling laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You think you've won because you held the bridge? Look at your sensors, Elias." Ayanna looked down at her tablet and felt her heart skip. The fog surrounding the ship wasn't weather, it was a high-frequency jamming mist deployed by 3 unmarked tactical vessels that had just appeared on the long-range radar. "The rivals you kicked off the bridge weren't the main event," Madame Kwon whispered. "They were the bait. You are now in international waters, and your board of directors has just signed a temporary transfer of power while you are investigated for the gala incident." Just then, on the screen behind Madame Kwon, her personal secretary, the man who had orchestrated the bridge breach, tried to step forward to hand her a document. He didn't see the traditional low-profile tea table in his path. He tripped, his legs tangling in his expensive suit, and he went flying headfirst into the ornamental koi pond behind the pavilion. The loud splash and the sight of the serious, middle-aged man flailing among the golden fish was so absurd that even Madame Kwon's stoic expression flickered with annoyance. "It seems your elite staff is as clumsy as your strategy, mother," Elias said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "We'll see you at the next port. If you can keep your men out of the water long enough to meet us." He cut the feed, the screen going black just as a loud, metallic thud echoed from the ship's hull. The board's tactical team had arrived. The metallic thud against the hull was not a collision, but the rhythmic strike of magnetic boarding harpoons, a sound Elias knew meant the board of directors had officially moved from legal threats to a tactical retrieval. He didn't wait for the ship's internal alarms. He knew the board's specialists would have suppressed the sirens to avoid a mass panic in the grand ballroom below. He reached into a hidden compartment of the lounge's mahogany desk, pulling out a localized EMP burst device and a secondary encrypted comms link. The realism of the situation was cold. His mother didn't want him dead, she wanted him neutralized and the ghost architect captured for the family's private use. The fog isn't just a screen, Ayanna, Elias said, his voice dropping into a combat-ready staccato as he discarded his tuxedo jacket to reveal the functional shoulder holsters beneath. They are using a localized greyout to cut us off from the mainland. My mother is trying to initiate a founder's override to trap my personal guards in their barracks and isolate us. Inside the lounge, Ayanna's fingers were a blur of motion, her eyes reflecting the cascading red lines of a logic virus eating through the ship's navigation. Elias, she's not just after the ledgers, Ayanna shouted over the hum of the auxiliary power. She's slaving our engines to the tactical vessels outside via a remote tow frequency. If I don't break the encryption in the next 3 minutes, this ship will start moving toward the family's private, unmapped coordinates, and we'll lose the protection of international maritime law. She didn't look up as the first muffled explosion rocked the iron corridor outside. She was the only one who could keep the ship's heart beating while Elias fought the shadows in the hallway. He stepped out into the narrow, reinforced passage, the strobe lights of the failing electrical grid making him look like a predatory ghost. 3 tactical operators in unmarked black gear rounded the corner, their suppressed rifles raised, but they didn't expect the Phantom King to be waiting in the dark. Elias triggered the EMP burst, and the hallway was plunged into a chaotic flicker as the operator's night vision goggles short-circuited. In the darkness, he moved with the terrifying efficiency of a man who had been raised in the shadow world before he ever sat in a boardroom. He used the tight space to his advantage, disarming the lead operator with a brutal, calculated strike before the man could even adjust his sights. The last moment of the battle came when the third operator, blinded by the EMP, tried to lunge at Elias with a high-voltage stun baton. He didn't realize that the heavy, gold-plated statues of soaring eagles lining the corridor had been loosened by the earlier hull thud. As he lunged, his foot caught the edge of a silk rug, and he went sliding across the polished marble floor. He slammed headfirst into a statue, which promptly tipped over and clamped its golden beak onto the back of his tactical vest, pinning him to the floor like a trapped insect. Elias looked back at the lounge door just as the lights turned a steady, calm blue. "The link is broken, Elias," Ayanna said. "I didn't just stop the tow. I sent a return to sender command." The dawn light was a bruised purple against the horizon as Elias and Ayanna moved toward the observation lounge, the ship's highest point. The tactical fog had begun to dissipate, revealing the retreating silhouettes of the mother's vessels, now forced toward the coastline by Ayanna's hijacked navigation codes. Inside the lounge, the 6 members of the board of directors sat around a circular table of reinforced glass, their faces pale in the early light. They had spent the night believing they were the new masters of the Sovereign, but as the electronic locks on the double doors hissed open, the sight of Elias Kwon, blood on his knuckles and a cold, predatory calm in his eyes, made the air in the room vanish. He didn't shout, he didn't even draw a weapon. He simply walked to the head of the table and sat down, while Ayanna took her place behind him, her tablet open like a digital executioner's blade. "You filed a notice of incapacity," Elias began, his voice steady and melodic, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. "You claimed I lost control. But the only people currently being escorted off this ship in zip ties are the mercenaries you hired." The chairman of the board tried to stand, his voice trembling. "Elias, this was a protective measure. Your mother expressed concerns about your emotional stability. We acted in the best interest of the dynasty." Elias leaned forward, the light from the rising sun catching the sharp, unforgiving angles of his face. "The dynasty is a legacy of blood, not paperwork," he whispered. Ayanna stepped forward then, her screen illuminating the dark mahogany of the table. "While you were waiting for the tactical team to report a successful capture," she said, her voice cutting through the room with surgical precision, "I was busy liquidating your personal stakes in the Kwon Heritage Foundation. It turns out that protective measures are incredibly expensive when they fail." She tapped the screen, and a series of notifications chimed simultaneously on the board members' private phones. The color drained from their faces as they realized their offshore accounts had been flagged for sanctioned activity due to the tactical team's unmarked, illegal status. In the eyes of the global banking system, they weren't directors anymore, they were rogue financiers of a private maritime war. "You are now officially blacklisted," Ayanna added, her eyes meeting the chairman's. "Not just from this ship, but from every major exchange." The chairman slammed his fist on the table, his face darkening with the kind of rage that had destroyed smaller men than Elias. He reached into his jacket and produced a secondary legal injunction, a hard-copy court order signed by 3 international judges, clearly prepared weeks in advance. "You cannot liquidate what the courts have already frozen, Mrs. Kwon," he hissed, sliding the document across the table with cold satisfaction. Ayanna picked it up without blinking. She read 3 lines, then set it face down beside her tablet. "This injunction references account numbers," she said quietly. "Specifically, the accounts that no longer exist as of 11 minutes ago. You had your lawyers freeze the shell." "I already emptied the safe." The chairman's certainty cracked. In a fit of blind rage, he lunged across the table to grab her tablet. He forgot the glass had been polished to a mirror shine. His silk-sleeved arms hit the surface and slid forward with zero friction, causing him to faceplant into a silver tray of decorative, oversized pearls. The tray flipped, sending hundreds of pearls rolling across the floor. As the other board members tried to flee, they found themselves performing a chaotic, uncoordinated dance, their expensive shoes sliding on the pearls like they were on ice. One director ended up doing a full split before sliding under the buffet table. Elias stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "The board is dissolved." Ayanna set a course for the obsidian crag. "We have one more call to make." The salt-heavy air of the nameless northern strait whipped across the upper observation deck, a cold reminder that the sovereign had finally entered the private, lethal waters of the Kwon family's hidden stronghold, the obsidian crag. Below the surface, the passive sonar pings confirmed that the mother's silent, short-range interceptor submarines were tracking the hull's acoustic signature like deep-sea predators, while above, the lights of the ancestral fortress flickered on the jagged volcanic cliffs like a crown of thorns. Elias stood at the railing, his silhouette carved from the absolute darkness of the ocean, his hand resting on the cold steel of the barrier. He wasn't looking at a neon city skyline, he was looking at a brutalist monolith built into the rock itself, miles away from the prying eyes of any global satellite. Ayanna sat in the shadow of the communications array, her laptop glowing with the pulsating blue light of a killswitch protocol. Elias turned away from the looming fortress, his gaze softening only when it landed on her. He walked over, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw in a brief, possessive gesture that spoke louder than any vow. "She's waiting for us to dock, Elias," Ayanna said, her voice cutting through the whistling wind with a sharp, calculated clarity. "She believes that once we hit the private pier, the maritime laws end and the family traditions begin. She's already prepared the isolation wing for me and the forced retirement papers for you." Elias leaned down, his face inches from hers, the scent of sea salt and expensive cologne mingling in the narrow space between them. "My mother has spent 40 years turning this specific stretch of water into a graveyard for anyone who challenged the Kwon name," he whispered, his voice a low, intimate growl. "But she made one fatal mistake. She thought you were a tool I was using, not the person I was building this for." He reached out, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his eyes searching hers for even a flicker of doubt. Ayanna didn't flinch, she leaned into his touch for a fleeting second, a silent confirmation that they were a single, unbreakable unit. "I didn't come this far to stand behind you, Elias," she replied, her voice soft but absolute. "Every lock I built, Every enemy I buried, I did it so that when this moment came, we would walk through that door as equals. Not king and ghost. King and queen. She smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips that signaled the end of the mother's reign. She had spent the last hour weaving a recursive logic loop into the Crag's own power grid. Every time the fortress's security teams tried to ping the ship's location, they were inadvertently feeding their own master encrypted passwords back to Ayanna's terminal. I have the thermal signatures of every guard on that cliff, Elias. The moment we cross the 3-mile marker, I can trigger a total cascading blackout. They'll be fighting in a lightless vacuum while we walk through the front gate. The tension reached its breaking point when a massive, black-hulled interceptor boat roared out from the sea caves of the crag, its searchlights blinding the deck. A voice boomed over the speakers, the mother's personal commander, demanding a total surrender of the ghost architect in exchange for Elias's safe passage. The commander tried to use a high-pressure, automated water cannon to force the Sovereign to reduce its speed, but he didn't realize that Ayanna had already hijacked the interceptor's pump control system. Instead of firing at the supership, the heavy cannon swiveled 180 degrees and blasted the interceptor's own bridge with a high-velocity stream of seawater. The commander was knocked backward into a pile of industrial life vests, while his second-in-command was sent sliding across the wet deck like a frantic penguin, eventually coming to rest with his head stuck inside a decorative plastic buoy. Elias watched the chaos with a cold, triumphant smile, his arm tightening around Ayanna's waist. "The crag is waiting, Ayanna," he said, leading her toward the helipad as the chopper's engines began their roar. "Let's go show my mother what happens when a ghost finally decides to take the throne." The helicopter descended through a veil of artificial chemical mist, its rotors cutting the air above the obsidian crag with a rhythmic, predatory thrum that signaled the arrival of a new era. Below, the private volcanic island rose from the churning dark water like a jagged tooth of basalt, a fortress designed not for luxury, but for the absolute, iron-fisted survival of a shadow dynasty that answered to no government. Elias sat in the cabin, his hand resting with practiced ease on the grip of his sidearm, but his gaze was fixed entirely on Ayanna. For a brief second, the Phantom King vanished, replaced by a man who looked at the woman beside him as if she were the only thing keeping the world from spinning off its axis. He reached out, his gloved fingers grazing the side of her neck, checking her pulse not for medical reasons, but as a grounding anchor. "When we walk through those doors, there is no turning back," he whispered, his voice dropping into a low, intimate register that was reserved only for her ears. Ayanna didn't look away from her screen, but she leaned into his touch for a heartbeat, a silent confirmation that they were a single unit. "I didn't come this far to kneel at the finish line," she replied, her voice soft but absolute. "Whatever walks through those doors, we face it standing up. Together." They stepped onto the reinforced landing pad, the silence of the island absolute, broken only by the distant, rhythmic crash of the ocean against the volcanic cliffs. They walked through the vaulted corridors of the crag, their footsteps echoing against walls of polished black stone that had never appeared on a standard map. In the center of the great hall, Madame Kwon sat behind a desk of solid obsidian. Her presence was so cold it seemed to draw the light out of the room, leaving only the glow of her antique monitors. She didn't look up from her tea until the couple stood directly before her. "You've dismantled my board, Elias," she said, her voice a low vibration. "But you are still bound by my blood. A king without a kingdom is just a man waiting for his execution." She finally set down her tea with quiet, deliberate precision, the sound of the cup meeting the saucer like a gavel. "I built you, son. Every weapon you carry, every fear your name creates, I forged that. You think you've won because you have the girl and the codes. But I have something neither of you can encrypt." She rose slowly, her silver hair catching the cold light like a blade. "I have time. And I have patience. And I will still be sitting in this room long after both of you have burned." She signaled to the shadows, where her shadow guard waited. Ayanna stepped forward, her thumb hovering over the zero-state protocol. One tap and every system in the crag would wipe itself back to factory silence. The crag doesn't belong to the Kwon name anymore, madam, it belongs to the one who controls its pulse, she said with a mathematical certainty. Every asset is now tethered to a biometric lock that only Elias can open with a heartbeat. Madame Kwon's eyes flickered as she realized the ghost had turned the fortress into a prison. Her chief enforcer tried to burst through the side doors, but Ayanna had reversed the electromagnetic floor strips. As he charged, his tactical boots were vacuum-sealed to the floor with a violent clack. He tipped over like a fallen timber, his face landing squarely in a bowl of cold bean curd. The sound of the legendary assassin muffled by the paste brought a dark smirk to Elias's face as he leaned over the desk. The era of the founder is over, he whispered. He didn't order her death, he ordered her isolation. He turned to Ayanna, pulling her flush against his side as the fortress's lights flickered to their signature, dominant blue. They walked out of the hall, leaving the matriarch in her stone tomb. As they reached the helipad, the sun broke over the horizon, turning the water to gold. The ghost had a name now. The phantom had a partner. And for the first time in the history of the Kwon dynasty, the throne wasn't inherited through blood or fear. It was built, line by line, lock by lock, by a woman they had tried to erase. Ayanna Faye was no longer invisible. She was inevitable. But as the great obsidian doors sealed shut behind them, neither of them saw the old woman's lips curve into the thinnest, coldest smile. She had taught Elias everything he knew. She had not taught him everything she knew.